Welcome, everybody. This is Joey Manson, and I am the Center Director at the Seward Park Audubon Center. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. If you don't have the best seat in the house, you might want to nudge the person you're sitting next to and tell them to stop hogging the sofa. This is the program that we typically hold at the Royal Room. And of course, right now, in the summer of COVID, the Royal Room is closed. But if you love the Royal Room, they are doing webinars. So you can listen to music on Wednesdays and Fridays. So even though we're not in the Royal Room, you're welcome to get your favorite mixed drink or have a beer and relax and enjoy the program. I want to thank everyone who was able to make a donation for tonight's event. We're truly grateful. We thank you for your support, and it really is very meaningful for us. Our host, or excuse me, our guest will be sharing just a little bit from his book. That book is available through mountaineersbooks.com. It's always great to support some of these other nonprofits who are working in Seattle. And this program will be recorded. It is being recorded, and you can watch it probably starting at 9 o'clock if you go to our presentation rewind page on our website. You can find it right there on the home page. So tonight, to introduce tonight's guest and facilitate the question and answer segment at the end of the program, we have a young man who is like tonight's guest, is no stranger to wanderlust and also hails from New York. He's a remarkable young man who volunteers at Seward Park Audubon Center, among other things. And I want to welcome him and thank him for sharing his time this evening with us. Welcome, Armand Lucas.
Thanks, Joey. Welcome everybody to Seward Park Audubon Center's live streaming presentation. My name is Armand Lucas. I'm an environmental scientist. I volunteer at Seward Park. I'm excited to be here to introduce our presenter because I'm originally from New York City, so I'm really excited to introduce a fellow New Yorker. Again, as Joey mentioned, tonight's program will be recorded and available on the rewind page. I'll be also at the end fielding questions, so make sure you, if you have any questions, make sure you add those to the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom page. J.R. Harris, at the age of 22, drove from New York City to Alaska at the age of 22, drove to Alaska in 1966. And it really set the stage for an amazing life of an adventure and many more excursions and great stories to tell. And so it's really my honor to introduce our guest, J.R. Harris. J.R.?
Yes, and thank you everybody for coming. Thanks, Armand, for the invitation, for the introduction rather. So my talk is called Trail Talk from an Old Dirt Kicker. And I just want to clarify before I go any further to say that when I say old dirt kicker, it's the dirt that's old, not me. I kick old dirt, okay? Just wanted to mention that. So now I've been kicking this old trail dirt for a long time. And since the mid-1960s, I've done more than 50 multi-week backpack trips, mostly alone and unsupported, all over the world. And during that time, I met a lot of people who are curious about what it's like to be out there. So my presentation today, I'm going to say a few words about the 10 wilderness issues that people are most curious about. And to address each issue, I'm going to take you on a little trip and tell you a story of one of my journeys somewhere in the world where that issue or question was relevant. Where applicable, I'm going to read a few brief passages from my book, Way Out There. And so now I'm going to give you a very short commercial. This is the book, Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker. It's got 9 chapters. Each chapter is a different trip starting in 1966 up to the present. They're in chronological order. And they're based on my very detailed journals that I kept on every trip that I've been on. Most of these trips are solo. Most of them are off the grid. A lot of them are back when there was no technology, no GPS, no cell phones, and what have you. The book also contains maps, photos, a bibliography, and it's not just a book about where I've been and what happened while I was there, there's a lot of introspection there. I talk about what it feels like to be alone, for example, or to be afraid, and what I really like about being in the wilderness and things like that. So I hope maybe this talk will make you curious to check the book out. Once again, Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker. All right, let's lace them up and hit the trail. So starting with number 10, people want to know, like, why do you do this? Why do you go out there? Why would somebody leave the comforts of home and go out in the middle of nowhere with a pack on the back, sleep on the ground? You know, what is in it for? Why would somebody do that? Well, there are a lot of answers to that. I like the adventure. I like the excitement. I like the change of environment. But most of all, I do it because I'm curious. I'm curious about everything. And curiosity is the engine that drives exploration. And exploration is that need to just get out there and see it and do it and be there to see it in person. So among the things that I'm most curious about are people who live in really remote areas. And so what I'll do is I'll pick out a group of people, Inuit, Aborigines, what have you, and set up an expedition and just go out there and see how they live. I do a lot of research before I leave home, but typically I don't know anybody who lives there. I've never been there before. And I just show up and see what I can learn by interacting with the people. So back in 2012, I went down to Peru, to Alsangate, which is a sacred mountain. Now, when people talk about Peru and the Incas, they generally talk about Machu Picchu. I wasn't really that interested in old abandoned buildings, but I was told that if you go back far enough into the Andes Mountains, you can still find people who are living the same way they were living 500-600 years ago. And so that's what I wanted to do. So in this first picture right here, I'm in Cusco, where I went to acclimatize before I headed into the mountains. Cusco is about 11,000 feet, and I stayed here for about 5 days. I was alone on this trip. And in this photo, you see people coming from neighboring communities and towns around Cusco on a Sunday afternoon, dressed in kind of traditional clothing, and really just hanging out and having a good time. It was really nice to see this kind of an introduction to these indigenous people, these ancient civilizations who are still living there. And then after 5 days, I got on a bus, rode all day long, and then got off in a little town in the mountains and started walking. And I finally made a campsite here. That mountain in the back is Alsangate, the sacred mountain. My campsite here is at about 14,000 feet. That little stream that you see next to my campsite was really coming from that glacier that you can see directly in the mountain in the background. So I was told that if you walk around to the back of this mountain, there are still small communities and family groups of people living life the way they used to do it back in the old days. To walk around this mountain is about 50 miles. And so that's what I did. I started going there. And when I got around to the other side, I started seeing people. This woman here is actually, she was herding a pack of llamas. She got a baby on her back. She wasn't all that crazy about being photographed, so I respected that. I also respected that she had this big evil dog that was barking and snarling at me, so I didn't want to get too close to her. This is a community, one of the few that I saw in the back here. It's usually about 4 or 5 families living together in these old huts made of sod, and they have thatched roofs made of puma grass. Typically, there's just a door and maybe one window because it's quite cold and windy up there, and there's no indoor plumbing or anything like that. A lot of these people don't even speak Spanish. They're still speaking the original language called Quechua. My Spanish is fairly decent enough to get by, so I was able to communicate with people who did speak Spanish. And most of them are llama and alpaca herders still. This is a herd that they had behind the stone corral. Some of these family groups make these corrals to keep the animals in. In other cases, I saw them just wandering around on these slopes of the mountains. They use dogs to kind of keep them in line and to herd them and keep them together. So then I got, I hit the jackpot here. I was camping one night and these group of 4 guys came up on horseback, and they made a camp close to where I was. And they were saying, like, who are you and what are you doing here? You know, it's really unusual to see a guy like me out there alone. When I told them why I was there and that I was interested in learning about the culture and the history of the people there, I found out that this gentleman that you're looking at here was a shaman. And he had come to the sacred mountain to make a sacrifice on behalf of a couple who wanted to have a baby. And they were so impressed that I would come all the way from New York City just to learn about their way of life, that he invited me into his tent to witness this ceremony that very few outsiders have ever seen. So this photo here is taken inside the tent where he's preparing a sacrifice for the sacred mountain. It took about an hour for him to put all this together. It starts with chewing these cocoa leaves. You can see the green patch of leaves there next to the white cloth that he had on the ground. We chewed that for about an hour. It started to get a little fuzzy after that, I must admit. But he then proceeded to make the sacrifice very slowly, intricately, putting one piece at a time down there, sometimes dipping it into the liquid, sometimes making different types of prayers and offerings. There's a lot of sweets there. The Pachamama, one of the gods that they worship, loves sweets, a female god, goddess. And then when he had the sacrifice all worked out and was satisfied with it, he had the other guys go outside and make a fire. And then we went outside, and while the fire was burning, he folded up the sacrifice and laid it on the fire. It took about 20 minutes of him watching very, very intently and very closely at this fire and at the sacrifice being burned before he was finally satisfied that the sacred mountain had accepted his sacrifice. And then we could, you know, after that, it was all over. It was really cold by that time that night. So that's the reason why I go. I'm curious. I learn about people. And in my book, I talk about curiosity. And here's a brief quote. Here's what I have to say about curiosity. A curious mind can never rest. There are too many lessons to learn, too many things to see and do, too many questions that need answers, and the answers only beget more questions. So the curious mind is always restless and can never be satisfied. If you let your body follow, a curious mind will lead you down paths never anticipated. What you end up with is a life of incessant exploration and discovery. This can be frustrating because true curiosity never achieves closure, or it can be fulfilling for exactly the same reason. A curious mind may never be satisfied, but if you remain inquisitive, it will always be gratified. So that's why I go. Let's move on to number 9. People say, well, what kinds of skills do you have? What do you need to know to be able to go out here in the middle of nowhere? My thing about skills is that if you're going into an environment that's different from your own, you're probably going to need to learn a skill set that's appropriate for being in that environment. So now here in 2008, I'm going to take you all now to Newfoundland, to Grossmore National Park. I went here and I chose this trip here because of all the trips I ever took in my life, this is the only trip, the only place I ever went to where in order to go into the backcountry, you had to take a skill test. The rangers had to test to see whether you were proficient in map and compass and whether or not you can navigate out on your own. So, and the curious thing about it is they wouldn't give you a wilderness permit. A wilderness permit back in 2008 cost about 125 Canadian dollars. And they made you buy the permit before you took the test. And if you didn't pass the test, you didn't get your money back. So they're really serious about not letting people go back there who didn't know what they were doing in terms of navigation skills. The other thing that's curious about this place, the name Gros Morne is French. And my French isn't great, but I know that Gros means big and Morne means dismal, dreary, lousy. So that's the name, the Big Dreary National Park. And I just want to read to you a description of this national park from the Gros Morne National Park website back in 2008 that describes this park and the route that I wanted to take through the long range mountains that run through this park. It says the long range mountains provide hikers with some of the most scenic and challenging hiking terrain in eastern North America. Hiking in the long range mountains is physically and mentally challenging. It is remote, strenuous, and potentially hazardous. There are no built trails along the long range, although there are a number of suggested backcountry routes. These routes are not marked with signs or maintained in any manner. Hikers need backcountry travel experience, be self-reliant, and proficient using maps and compass to navigate unfamiliar wilderness terrain. Now, it's clear to me that the government is not really encouraging people to come to this park, given its name and this description. But I wanted to go there anyway. And now here's the main reason why it's so tough to get around there and navigate. This dense vegetation is called tuckamore. There are no trails going through there. Some game trails actually going through there. But the deal is, you go in, let's say heading north, and by the time you push your way through and you come out the other end, you're not really sure if you're heading north anymore because it's so thick in there, you can't really go in a straight line. So it's really very confusing all the time. Now, once you get out of the tuckamore, if you keep going higher, you get beyond those trees and the tuckamore, and it gets to be rocky with a little bit of tundra, and you get up to the top of the range there, the long range mountains. And so here I am at the top of the range, and I'm striking just one of these old school selfie poses, where you take your camera and put it on a rock or something, and you push the time release shutter, and then you jump in front and you strike a macho pose. So I'm striking my little macho pose right here, but I was in a lot of trouble because I dropped my compass and broke it. And with no way to navigate, there was no way I could finish hiking this trek. And in fact, there was no way I could even turn around and go back the way I came because it was just too complicated. So what I had to do as I look out, you can notice back in the distance there, there's that lake. It was kind of a long lake going east and west. And it occurred to me that if I can make it to that lake and then follow the lake to the right along the shoreline, that eventually it would take me back to the ocean and I would be fairly close to where I started out. That was the only option I have. You could see miles of tuckamore that I had to go through. It took me 3 days to get to the lake, then another 2 days there to walk back to the ocean, but it was the only option I had without any way to navigate. And so here's a campsite when I finally made it back to the ocean. It was maybe from here another 5 or 10 miles to the trailhead that I started out from. So it's all about skills. Here's a look at some of the basic wilderness travel skills. These 10 basic skills. And when I look at a list like this, the thing that occurs to me is that there are some things on this list that are skills that you would use pretty much on a daily basis. Skills like map and compass navigation, for example, crossing rivers and streams, equipment repair maybe. But there are some other skills on here that you might not use very often and hopefully never have to use. I'm talking about first aid or equipment repair or building an emergency shelter or finding food. The thing about it though is that wilderness skills are not necessarily things that you're going to use every day. It's things that you need to use if you have them. And my feeling about skills is that having these skills gives you confidence, so that if something goes wrong and you need to kind of improvise or find a way out, you'll have the confidence to be able to do it, even if the instrument you use, in this case a compass, is no longer there. So it's really about acquiring skills, and skills giving you the confidence to go out there. Looking at number 8 now, planning. So people say, well, how do you plan one of these trips? You know, these multi-week trips out in the middle of nowhere. How do you know what to bring? How do you get it together? Well, everybody kind of has their own way of planning and their own method that they like to use. What I like to do is I divide everything into 4 categories: food, clothing, gear, and logistics. So here's an example. This is food, clothing, right? Gear. You know, anybody out there who's an ultralight person is going to look at these 3 slides, excuse me, and say, wow, this guy's carrying a lot of stuff. But it was a long trip up there in the gates of the Arctic in Alaska. I was going to be gone for 3 weeks. It was going to be me and a friend of mine, and it was a complicated trip. For example, we had to fly from New York and get up to the Brooks Range, which is north of the Arctic Circle in Alaska. And then from there, it was 10 days hiking, backpacking across the tundra to an unnamed lake. And then at that lake, I arranged for a bush pilot to fly in with a canoe and some more supplies. And then we would take the canoe, drag it to the river that was close by, and then paddle down this national wild and scenic river called the John River for another 10 days. So there's a lot of detail that had to be dealt with and put together. And what I like to do, just to give you an idea of what it would be like in 1986, more than 30 years ago, to plan a trip like this. And this again is an excerpt from the book. It says, if we're doing this trip accompanied by a local outfitter with experience in that environment, all the planning would be taken care of. We'd be given a list of what to bring and advice on what to expect, and we would not have to deal with the complex logistics. Doing it independently meant assuming all the risks, which emphasized the importance of careful, detailed preparation. Our planning began more than 6 months before the departure date. In that largely pre-internet era, we typed and sent snail mail letters to the National Park Service and to anyone else who might have any information about Northern Alaska. There were books to read about the Arctic and the Brooks Range. There were indigenous people to learn about as well. The Nunavut or Inupiat Eskimos, who lived in the northern part of the Brooks Range, and the Athabascan Indians, who inhabited the southern regions. We researched and charted weather trends, made estimates of daily time and travel distances, got information on airline schedules, lodging, charter flights, canoe rentals, made lists of food and gear requirements, evaluated warmth to weight ratios for different articles of clothing, and estimated our budgets. We also learned about the area's flora and fauna, including how to travel safely in grizzly country. And we discussed various emergency scenarios and how we would deal with them. We gathered information about wilderness first aid and put together a comprehensive first aid kit. I ordered topographic maps of the region from the US Geological Survey and waited impatiently for them to arrive by mail. We purchased a lightweight 12-gauge shotgun and went to a gun club every week to learn gun safety and practice shooting. bear spray, a must-have today for safe travel in grizzly country, was not available back then. Also not available were bear-proof food containers or cell phones. Once we left our point of departure, we would have no method of communication and would be totally out of touch with the rest of the world. Our planning took nothing for granted. On January of 1986, 6 months before we departed, a malfunction of a simple O-ring destroyed the Space Shuttle Challenger. And just 3 months later, a mishandled safety test resulted in a nuclear power point disaster at Chernobyl. The impact of these tragic events were not lost on us. So as you can see, a lot of really detailed planning. So here's what happened when we went, okay? This one here, the first is the 10-day trek across the tundra from a Inuit village called Anaktuvik Pass. It was had a lot of snow actually, even though this was in August. Then we finally got to this lake at a place called Hunt Fork. This is the bush pilot who came in and met us there with a canoe and 10 more days worth of food. Then we got in the canoe on the John River and went down from there to where it empties into a much larger river called the Koyukok River. The highlight of this trip for me was climbing this mountain. Now the Brooks Range back in 1980s and before, most of these peaks in this mountain range have never been climbed and have no names. And there was a tradition back then that if you were the first to climb a mountain, you could name it. And so this mountain that you're seeing here had never been climbed. I was the first one. I climbed up here and I named the mountain. I named it after my brother. And when I got back to civilization, I went to the USGS, gave them the information, they took it down. And so that is now the official name, Lloyd Mountain. Now, this is the John River here, just where a creek on the right side called 60 Mile Creek comes in. So if you're ever in this neighborhood, why not walk up that mountain and check it out? You'll probably be the second person that's been up there. When you get to the top, you'll see I built a stone cairn, and underneath there, you pile of rocks. I put a Ziploc plastic bag with a piece of paper with my name, the date, what I wanted to call the mountain, and all that stuff is probably still there. So the lesson for me was, if you're a careful planner, you're going to be okay. Most of the bad things that happen on a trip are a result of poor planning. And you can't really overemphasize how important it is to be as detailed as possible if you're going to be gone, especially for weeks at a time in a really remote, off-the-grid area. Let's go now to number 7, fitness. I'm often asked, what kind of shape do you have to be in? How do you have to train and what have you? I think it's pretty obvious that to travel in the wilderness, you need to be fit. You need to be in good shape. As far as I'm concerned, if you're not in good shape, you're not going to have a good time. It's just going to be really hard. And if you're not going to have a good time, what's the point in going? If you're not going to have fun. And so the idea is to try to be as fit as you can. I could have picked any trip, but I picked this one here. It's Jotunheimen National Park in Norway back in 2014. I went here alone, and this trip was a very rugged trip where fitness really comes into play. If you look down in that valley, you could see a road. That's where the bus ends. I flew into Oslo, Norway, took a bus, and it went all the way to the end of this road, which is kind of in the center of your screen here. And as you can see, the road turns around. That's the end of the road, and the bus will go back. The other thing about it is that as soon as you get off the bus, you have to start climbing. This photo is about 1,000 feet above there where I first started. And, I like to, if possible, go on a trip where the first day is not too tough. You know, you have a chance to acclimatize, get your body in shape, get used to the environment and the weather. In this case, that wasn't to be. As soon as I started, you have to start climbing. So 1,000 feet and then keep going up. And this picture here is maybe 2,000 feet above that long lake there. That's not a fjord, it's a lake. Why I went there and where I was going was to climb this mountain called Glittertind. Glittertind is the second highest mountain in Norway. It's a little over 8,000 feet. And curiously enough, this mountain used to be the tallest mountain in Norway, but it had a large snowfield on top, and they measured the height of the mountain from the top of the snowfield. Well, over time, the snow began to melt, and so the mountain went down and down until a neighboring mountain that had no snow became the highest mountain in Norway, and this mountain became the second highest mountain. Actually, this mountain here is only about 15 feet or so lower than the highest mountain in Norway. So this is Glittertind. Took me about 4 or 5 days to get here, mostly walking uphill. As I get close to the top, you can see that there's still a bit of a snowfield up here at the summit. I made a camp down in the valley and made this final climb as a day hike all the way up. Here's a shot just at the summit on the snowfield, looking back down into the canyon, into the valley rather, where I had my camp. And here I am, you know, at the summit with another old school selfie, macho pose, looking happy and feeling fit. And the reason why I picked this trip to illustrate fitness is because I did this trip a couple of weeks after I turned 70 years old. And, you know, even at that age, you know, where they're probably more days behind than in front, it really pays to be fit because I really did have a good time here. Let's talk about attitude. You know, in the rush and the concern about planning and fitness and learning the skills and whatever, a lot of people discount the importance of attitude. And that, I believe, is a big mistake, because everything on a trip is good until it goes bad. And when it goes bad, it can go bad really quickly. And if you find yourself in a tough situation, survival situation, keeping a positive attitude is not only very important, but it could be the thing that actually saves you. You know, they say only the strong survive. I don't really agree with that. I think that in a survival situation, the person most likely to survive is the person who's able to keep it together and not lose faith and not lose hope, and just be able to tough it out and keep a good attitude. So this happened here at Alpine Walking Track in Australia in 1997. I went on this trip here with 2 friends of mine in the Australian Alps, the Great Dividing Range. And we're going to be gone a couple of weeks here. We pulled into a small town at the base of the range and hired a guy in a kind of ATV, all-terrain vehicle, to drive us 30 miles on this rugged, bumpy road into the mountains. And we were going to make a campsite that night and then start hiking or backpacking the next day. So the guy dropped us off, he left. We walked about a mile to the campsite, which was on a nice river where you have plenty of water. And when we got there, the river was dry. And so right away we realized we were in trouble. We knew that there had been drought conditions that summer, but we were assured that there were places where there was perennial streams and we would be able to find water, this place being one of them. And when there was no water there, we knew that a lot of the other places where it was going to be sketchy probably wouldn't have any water either. So we were in a lot of trouble right off the bat. Plus, it was very, very hot, over 100 degrees every single day. Here's what the mountains look like. Very few trails here, very, very steep. A lot of undergrowth, a lot of growth on the side. It was just hard to move through here with all that heat. And even today, when I look at these slides, I could still feel the heat and the lack of water, and it was terrible. We had no water to drink, and of course, without water, we also could not eat because our food was freeze-dried and we needed water to reconstitute it, and it just wasn't there. So we'd hike all day long with very little water or no water, and then we'd have to split up when we got to a campsite, and each of us look for and hope to find water. And if we found it, it was usually a filthy puddle or drops coming out of a crack in the rock or something like that. It was terrible, and we realized that we were in a lot of trouble, but we knew that we had to keep it together. And so what we did is we sat down and we talked about it. And we said, we're in a lot of trouble. We're going to have to just take it one day at a time, but we have to keep positive. We have to stay in a positive frame of mind. Otherwise, we're going to be in trouble. We know that the one who loses it very often brings the other two down. And we didn't really want that to happen. So we actually realized the importance of having a good attitude in this situation. And it's not only us. You might be familiar with the explorer Ernest Shackleton from the Antarctica explorer back in the day. And Ernest Shackleton had 5 what he called essential characteristics for exploration in order. And his 5th one was courage, which you would think would be a lot higher. His 4th one was idealism, or being there for the right reason and understanding why you're there. The 3rd one was physical endurance. The 2nd most important was optimism. The 2nd most important was patience. And the most important one was optimism, or keeping a good attitude. So we decided that nobody was going to be the first person to complain, and that's how we proceeded. So here I am looking at a map, but really wondering what the hell I'm doing out there with no water, and hoping that things will change. And even when we got to this old homesteader's shack here, there was supposed to be a big, big creek right behind this old cabin here, and it was bone dry. And I can understand why this guy probably left, although there must have been water while he was there. In any event, when it was all over, the 3 of us made it. We were still friends. We didn't suffer too much. This photo was taken right after we finally found water at the end, and each of us had just finished drinking about 10 gallons apiece to get rehydrated. And till this very day, I still drink a lot of water. But it was about attitude that got us through, and that's the main thing. Let's go to weather. So, I'm going to go now. I'm going to take you all to Iceland back in 2005. But before I go there, back in the 1990s, I was once backpacking alone on the Continental Divide Trail in Colorado, about a 100-mile backpack between Steamboat Springs and Estes Park. And I was going up this trail and up over to a pass and down into another watershed. And just at the tree line, there was a sign off to the side, and the headline of the sign said, "Weather doesn't care." And the rest of the sign basically said, if the weather is not good as you're reading this sign, don't go any farther because you're going to be in a lot of trouble. It could snow on any day, the whiteout conditions. people that died on this trail and so forth. And so I always remember that, you know, weather doesn't care how important you are back home, or, you know, what your age is or anything. It just doesn't care. And so I remember that when I got to Iceland in 2005. The reason I went to Iceland, as you probably know, is a volcanic island. There are a lot of active volcanoes there. And some of these volcanoes are covered with glaciers. And I always wondered, like, what happens when an active volcano erupts and suddenly hundreds of tons, thousands of tons of ice melt? What happens with all that water? You know, it must be a real catastrophic event. I didn't want it to happen while I was there, but I'd heard that it had happened, and I wanted to go and see what it had done to the environment. This photo here is a smaller example of it. This is a glacier sitting on top of a volcano. And as you can see in the middle of the photo, it's kind of melted down into a cone shape from the heat coming from underneath that ice. And that water that you see trickling down is actually the beginning of a river in Iceland. So this is the interplay between ice and heat on a small scale. Now this is what happened back like in the late 1920s, 1930s, when a gigantic glacier covering an active volcano. The volcano erupted, and the water just flowed, millions of tons of water. Now, from the bottom of the picture across to the top, that area is about 4 miles across. And looking from left to right is about 20 or 25 miles from the volcano in the middle of the island all the way to the ocean. When that happened, all the water rushed all the way down to the ocean, 4 miles wide. Everything that was in its path disappeared. No trees, no rocks, no nothing. And just viewing that, you know, what gave me a glimpse of what nature can really do. But I'm really here talking about weather, and not long after this, the weather started to turn bad. It started to snow, started to get cold, and then it just kept getting colder, and it just kept snowing. And then after about 2 or 3 days of bad weather like this, the snow kind of let up, but then a terrific, incredible storm hit. And I had never seen a storm like this. And I'm telling you, you know, I've been going in the wilderness now over 50 years. This is the worst storm I ever saw in my life. I was able to set up my tent and stake it out with gigantic boulders just to keep it from blowing away. And then all I could do is get inside, zip it up, and wait for the day and a half for this thing to blow over. I had never seen anything like this in my life. And so when I got back to Reykjavik, the capital, I was asking around. I said, wow, you know, about a week ago, I got hit with this bad, really bad storm. And this guy said to me, yeah, that was a hurricane. That was a Category 5 hurricane. Now, I'd heard of Category 5, but I never really seen photos of one. You know, 3, 4, they all look really terrible, but a Cat 5, now I know. And he said, yeah, that hurricane was called Hurricane Katrina. And that's the hurricane that destroyed New Orleans. And I said, New Orleans is destroyed? And he says, oh yeah, New Orleans is underwater. You know, even all these days afterwards, it's still chaotic down there. They can't get a handle on it. They can't get it together. People are really in a lot of trouble. Well, it turns out that that hurricane, after it hit New Orleans, I found out later, continued up the east coast of the United States, and then it went back out into the North Atlantic, where it picked up strength all over again, became a Category 5, and then slammed into Iceland. So I happened to be there, unfortunately, but that was the way it is. And, you know, so what I've learned about weather is that sometimes you just have to deal with what you're given. That human beings don't control everything. There are forces stronger than us. And that weather can teach us to be patient. It can teach us, it can really teach us humility, if you want to look at it that way. And so that's what I've learned about weather. It doesn't matter, how important you are or that you have to get a certain place at a certain time. It's just not going to happen. And so you just have to deal with it. And I think that lesson of patience and humility are lessons that apply even when you're not in the wilderness. So here I am here just before the storm hit, and Hurricane Katrina, long after it hit the United States. So wildlife, number 4. I love to see wildlife when I'm in the backcountry. I wish I could see more of it. And one time I was up in the Yukon territory and I was talking to this Indian gentleman in Canada. They call them First Nations people. And I was telling him how much I really enjoyed seeing wildlife when I'm out there and how I wished that I could see more of it. And he said, if you want to see wildlife, I could tell you how to see wildlife in only 3 words: sit, watch, and learn. So he went on to tell me basically that what happens when you're walking in the wilderness, all the animals that are out there, all the wildlife that's out there, they know that you're coming. They can either see you, hear you, or smell you. And typically what they do is they simply just move out of the way and let you go by. And then after you're gone, they go back and they do what they were doing before you got there. But he said, if you want to see wildlife, the thing to do is find yourself a nice place where you can sit down. Sit, be patient, be quiet, don't fidget around, and just sit there. And what will happen is that eventually the animals that are around there will know that you're there and they'll sense that you are not a threat. And so slowly but surely, they'll start to come back and do what they were doing before you got there. And I tried it, and sure enough, it worked like a charm. Usually what happens is the birds come back first. And when the birds come back, I think maybe they're chirping or what have you, kind of signals to the other animals that everything is fine. After that, you usually see the smaller animals, the chipmunks, squirrels, marmots, pikers, whatever environment you're in, they start to come back. And then if you sit there long enough and you're patient enough, you'll see the elk and the deer and the bear and the big mammals coming back. And then as you sit there and they're there, you just watch them and then you can learn a lot about how they live. And so I just thought that was really a fascinating lesson. And I've tried it before, and it does take patience and time, but if you like wildlife, you can see it. And from 1980 to the present, I have seen a lot of wildlife in the wilderness. So here's a caribou that I saw up in Alaska. These are musk oxen that I saw on a trip where I was in Greenland. In the kind of middle of the picture, slightly towards the left, you can actually see my tent, my campsite there. They came very close to the campsite. These are an assortment of animals on the plain in Tanzania when I was in Africa. A python on a jungle trip that I took in Costa Rica. And of course, the koala bear in Australia. And even when you don't see actual animals, you can appreciate what they're doing and how they live. This is one of the really nicest beaver dams I've ever seen. This one was in Denali National Park in Alaska. I don't know how many beaver it took to build this, but that water on the right side of the screen is really quite a large lake. And it's holding back most of the water from the little puddles or the smaller pond that's on the left side. And I actually walked across this dam, very, very sturdy. It's been there quite some time, I would imagine, but unbelievable. And then, of course, when you wake up in the morning and you see fresh grizzly tracks about 20 feet from your campsite. And that's when you realize that, you know, hey, you're not at the top of the food chain. But I believe that seeing wildlife is a privilege. And I believe that we live on a shared planet and that they have as much right to be there as we have. And I believe that if we give these animals a little space and we give them a little bit of respect, that animals and people can live together in harmony. And that same lesson probably applies to other people as well. If we give a little space and a little respect, we can all get along. So that's what I learned about wildlife. Which brings us to 3. People say, yeah, but you go alone a lot. You know, what's up with that? I mean, why do you do it? What do you get out of it? And so to talk about being alone, I'm going to talk about this trail, this canal trail in the Northwest Territories back in 1997. When I went to walk across the Mckenzie Mountains, 233 miles. And the deal was I started in a small town called Norman Wells on the Mckenzie River. And I decided I would charter a plane to fly me to the end of the trailhead, to the end of the trail, 233 miles out, and then I would walk all the way back. So this guy standing next to me, his name is Perry Linton. He's a bush pilot. And back in 1997, he was the best bush pilot in all of Northern Canada. And I know that for a fact because he told me 10 times in the first 3 minutes after I met him. He was actually an excellent pilot. This is one of his planes. It's called a Helio Courier. It's a short takeoff and landing plane, big Tundra tires, so it can land almost anywhere. And my plan was that as he flew me out these 233 miles, I wanted him to land twice at 2 specific places. And at each place, I jumped out and I stashed a week's supply of food. So I had 2 food drops en route. And then when he dropped me off, I was going to carry 1 week's worth of food to get back to the first food drop, that week to get to the second food drop, and then that food to get back to the Mckenzie River here at Norman Wells. So that was really the plan. Here's the landing strip at McMillan Pass, where I was going to start hiking 233 miles from town to the nearest town, I might add. Not really an airport, obviously. It's just scraped into the tundra and an airstrip. There was nobody there. He dropped me off. And let me tell you, when I saw that airplane heading on back, that's when I knew I was really, really alone. And it took me 20 days to get back. During that time, I did not see another backpacker during the entire trip. But I want to tell you, it was fabulous. The scenery was incredible. The Mckenzie Mountains, there were 6 different ranges that had to be crossed. This was a trip that I did in late August to mid-September. And for a guy like me who likes to be alone, you know, I'm not a hermit, I'm not antisocial, I'm not misanthropic. I just like to be by myself. And this was a special aloneness, this solo trip, and one that I will always remember. Was just great. And here's a campsite on the Godwin River en route. It was at this campsite on this night was the night that Princess Diana of Great Britain died in a auto accident in Paris. I didn't find out until about 10 days later when I finally got back to the little town of Norman Wells and I saw all of the Canadian flags at half staff. And I said, I assumed that some local dignitary had died. And I said, well, you know, what happened? And I said, oh no, that was Princess Diana. I said, she died, yeah. And then the guy looked at me and he said, you know, with the incredible and intense media coverage that happened during and after that fateful accident, he said, "You are probably one of the very few people left on this planet who until this moment didn't know that she had died." And of course, you know, being alone, you know, even if I was with somebody, both of us wouldn't have known. But I do really appreciate being alone. And let me just read very briefly what I say in my book about being alone. Going solo is the ultimate detachment, provides an unusual opportunity to get more in touch with myself. And it makes me more intensely aware of my surroundings. I can actually feel my senses becoming keener to the point where I see things more fully than if I had been part of a group. What I especially like is not having to compromise on anything. I go where I want, when I want, at whatever pace I want. I eat when I'm hungry, rest when I'm tired, and I don't have to appease, consult, or agree with anybody. My life is all mine for the duration. In a way, it's selfish, but I like it and I don't feel guilty about it. There have been trips where I could have finished a day or two earlier, but I chose to stay on the fringe of civilization a little longer and not be tempted to reconnect by the lure of a hot shower, a fresh change of clothes, or a dinner that doesn't come pre-packed in a foil bag. There's a difference between aloneness and loneliness. I have never been lonely when alone in the wild. Obviously, it's a risky business, but it makes you more resourceful and self-reliant. And these are traits that you bring back home. Nevertheless, as much as I enjoy it, I have never advised anyone to go out alone. If you question whether it's a smart thing for you to do, it probably isn't. So again, it's not for everybody, but for those of you who have done it before, you know what it's like and you probably like it. So 2 more to go. One is fear here. Number 2, people ask me, are you ever afraid? Well, the short answer is yes. And the long answer is yes, yes, yes. I've been afraid a lot. As a matter of fact, if there was a PhD in fear, I would be Dr. Scared. And you know, it's not that every little thing scares me. The reason I've been scared so many times is because I'm old and I've been doing it for a very long time. And this particular trip that I took to Ayuituk National Park in Baffin Island, 1989, was special because scary things happened on this trip, probably more than a lot of other trips that I've been on. So I love this polar bear license plate up there in the Northwest Territories. Baffin Islands, like one of the largest islands in the world, 6th largest, I believe. When I went up there, Baffin Island was part of the Northwest Territories. It's not even part of the Northwest Territories anymore. It's now called Nunavut, which is the land that the Canadian government gave back to the Inuit people up there. So a lot of polar bears up there. They're nice on a license plate. What I didn't want to see is what I saw here, a polar bear on a iceberg with a seal carcass having lunch here. And these things are really scary. And so I was going to walk across the island, and the local people there told me that for the first 10 miles from the seashore, you're going to have to worry about polar bears. They said that polar bears like seals, and so they're not going to go too far inland because they want to be where the seals are in the ocean. So the first 10 miles, you're going to have to be careful. But once you get 10 miles in, you should be, you should be okay. So this is where I started here. And I started walking inland across the island. And I want to tell you, every 30 seconds, I would turn around because I was absolutely certain I was being stalked by a polar bear. I was unarmed, I was alone. I had a can of bear spray, and that was it. And I admit I was really, really scared. And even though I could see a long way back, 30 seconds later, I turned around and there was nothing there, but I was just petrified that one of these bears might be stalking me. So that was one thing. Then a couple of days later, I was walking through this valley and I stepped in a pool of quicksand. Now, I'd seen quicksand in the movies, on TV. I'd never experienced quicksand. But here I was, you know, stuck with both feet. And I realized it was kind of sucking me down a little. Without thinking, I just lunged off to the side to get out of it. And then I was able to roll out and get back safely to the side. And I was lying there on my back, breathing hard. And that's when the fear hit me later. You know, when I realized, you know, that it almost got me, that it came really close. And then a couple of days later, I got to this gorge. This is not the actual one, but it's the one I have a photo. And there was a cable going across just like here. And if you look right in the middle, you could see a chair. And the idea is you got to get in a chair and there's like a pulley system where you pull yourself across this raging river. Nobody really goes alone out here. And so typically you would have one person get in, get to the other side, and there would be people on either side. And then one by one, you put a bag on the chair, a backpack, and then a person until you get all of the gear and equipment across. But I had to do it all on my own. And the rusty cable and a little rickety chair, I just knew that it wasn't going to hold me and that I was going to fall down into that water and die. Or if I didn't die, that my pack would fall down and then I wouldn't have any food or clothing or anything. And the longer I looked at it, the more scared I got. But eventually I had no choice. There was no way I could go back. So I finally got through. And then here, almost to the end of the trip, I'm standing on the Arctic Circle. And there's a sign there that says Arctic Circle in 3 languages, English, French, and Inuktitut, the Inuit language. Striking my selfie, old school selfie pose, even though I'd spent days being petrified. But, you know, it is what it is. You know, it's fear. And let me just read you a little bit about what I say about fear. Fear shows itself in different ways. In a crisis that requires an instinctive and immediate reaction, you don't have time to be afraid. The fear comes when it's over. When you think about how close you came to catastrophe, like when I was in that quicksand. There are times when the fear messes with your mind. You vividly imagine a frightful scenario that in reality doesn't exist, like the thing with the polar bear. The worst fear, however, is when it's right there in front of you and there's ample time to experience it, when it simmers until it threatens to overwhelm. I learned that one should never be afraid of being afraid. Fear is a part of life, and it can be a very healthy part, especially when you realize that in a life-threatening situation, it is possible to rise above panic and maintain control of rampaging emotions. I understood what having courage really is. Not the absence of fear, but the acceptance of it. It's a good lesson to learn because you never get too old to get scared. Take it from Dr. Scared. So that brings us down finally to impact. You know, people say, well, you know, you've been kicking this dirt, you know, for half a century. What impact has it had on you? How has it changed your life? What does it really mean to you to have done all these different treks all over the world, you know? And so if I had to boil it all down to one word, that word would be gratitude. You know, I'm grateful that I was able to do it. I'm grateful that I'm still doing it. I'm grateful for all the places that I've been, all the people that I met, all the things that I've seen. And I'm really grateful for all the things that I've learned. And even though there again are fewer days for me in front than the days that I've already lived, it's fine with me because I'm still able to do it, and it's had such a positive impact on me after all these years from when I first started back in the mid-60s. So here I am, you know, in the Yukon Territory back in 1996 when I drove up from New York City by myself. And Racket Lake, 1980, This was a canoe trip. You know, I mean, who wears cowboy boots on a canoe trip, right? But that was in 80s, excuse me, 30 years ago. Forgive me for that. And then 1991, you know, I'm a Katahdin at the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail. You notice all these photos, I'm smiling. Glacier National Park, 1998. And 2006, here I am in Finland at the top of the highest mountain in Finland, in above the Arctic Circle in Lapland, Finnish Laplands. And not that long ago, in the Dolomite Mountains, I walked the AV1 route from north end to the south end. And that's it, you know, it's, I'm always smiling, I'm always grateful, and I'm still grateful and happy that I was able to do it. So that brings it to a close. I want to say in closing, you know, the wilderness environment can be a cruel place, even a savage place. But in another way, it's fragile and it's in need of protection. And in order to protect it, you need to appreciate it. And in order to appreciate it, you need to experience it. And so the more people we can get out there to experience it, the more success we're going to have in protecting it. So I'm hoping that my talk today and that my book will encourage somebody to get out there and in their own way and at their own pace, protect our public land and experience all the physical, mental, and emotional benefits that nature can provide. Thanks again for listening to my stories. Keep on trucking. Did I mention I was a Grateful Dead head? Keep on trucking, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you, JR. That was amazing. Really inspirational. We're grateful for having you and for presenting that. And so, again, everyone, JR's book is way out there. We have some questions. There's a lot of questions were fielded while you were presenting. The question I really had the whole time, because I'm a native New Yorker, I was wondering how your native New York roots like influence some of your attitude. I know I was thinking some of the points that you put out there. Being a New Yorker, how do you think that fed into your attitude and your courage to go out there and do some of these amazing ventures?
You know, a lot of people ask me that. They say, what are you doing out here? You're from New York City. You know, that's crazy. But I grew up in New York. I grew up in the projects. And I was a typical street smart New York kid. And I didn't really realize until I started going out there how you can transfer that street smart, you know, that kind of cocky, maybe confident attitude that you have growing up with all the stuff that you have to deal with growing up in the city, actually has a place or a part of your personality that you can use when you are in the backcountry. And you know, in my book, there's one part of the chapter where I talk about how I grew up in the city and what happened the first time I went up into the mountains in the Catskills as a teenager, as a Boy Scout, when my parents wanted to just get me out of the city. And I thought I was on a different planet. But the longer I stayed there, I began to get comfortable with it because it was just a matter of taking into account, you know, your surroundings and learning what you had to do to get over and having that confidence and the skill set and on and on and on. So as unlikely as it seems, growing up in the heart of New York City actually helped me in all those trips that I took in as far reaches around the world. I've done over 50 trips.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah, that resonates with me. The kind of the New York fearlessness, you know, and boldness can, you know, find itself out in the outdoor setting. I have some other questions here about some of your trips there when you were mentioning altitude sickness and also how long were you out in the wilderness without water? Just wondering, like, some of the extent of that. How long were you out in the wilderness in Australia without water?
Well, that was a terrible trip. We would find water maybe every day. We would find little puddle of disgusting water with dead bugs and leaves and twigs in it, and we would have to drink it. Or we would have to find, sometimes dig a little hole and in the sand where a dry riverbed was. It was just desperation. We would split up, and we were dog tired by then. And I started to get, feel the heat, the heat stroke was sickness. Your tongue swells up and it's totally dry. There's no saliva in your mouth. There's just nothing that you can do. And all you can think about all day long is water. And every once in a while, we found a little bit of water, and we'd fill up every container we had that would hold water so that we could have it that night for dinner and breakfast the next day, and then carry it with us during the day, during the heat, and not knowing if when we got there that night that if we would be able to find it. And I think that was really the hardest part of it all. It's the uncertainty. It's not knowing if you're going to find water and how much you need water, and how nobody can help you, and how you're just stuck and you have to deal with it. And you can't start feeling sorry for yourself, and you just have to keep it together. It was an ordeal. It was one of the hardest trips I ever took. And to this day, I have water.
Always readily available.
Oh man,
yeah,
I love it.
What one of the questions I see here is about someone says that they want your story is inspiring their son and who loves backpacking, and what advice might you give for future generations of people and young people who are interested in getting outdoors and kind of going past the margins like you did?
Well, first of all, I don't think you have to go as extreme as I do in order to get all the benefits that being outdoors can provide. My advice would be to go out there and go out there to have a good time, whether you're backpacking, bike riding, skiing, whatever it is, and learn to appreciate being outdoors, and learn to appreciate what being outdoors can do for you physically, mentally, emotionally, intellectually. There are so many benefits out there. And you can get these benefits by having a good time. A lot of studies have been done about how spending time outdoors can be really helpful. Well, I'm living proof of that. I started going out as a 13-year-old Boy Scout, and I didn't want to leave the city. I didn't know anything about the mountains. I didn't know anything about being in the woods or the forest. And that first summer, that first experience I had stayed with me to this very day. And I think that anybody, regardless of their age, your physical fitness, if you're in a wheelchair, crutches, whatever, do what you can. Go out and at your own pace and in your own way, get some fresh air. It's going to really help you. It's going to really, really, really help you. I really believe that. That's great.
There's another question here. There was one of the questions that came up in my mind. I know a lot of some of these excursions and backpacking trips, you always wish you had done. I love that you included fitness as one of your points. And one of the questions is anything you would, wondering what you do to stay in shape between trips. And I'm wondering the same. Are there exercise routines, stretching routines that you find essential as a part of being an adventurer?
Well, yes. You can't get in shape a week before you leave and hope that you're going to be in good enough shape. You have to make it part of your lifestyle. You have to do it on a consistent basis. The good news is that if you like being out there, especially if you like being out there as much as I do, that's all the motivation you need when you're not out there to stay fit. I don't do anything extreme, but I do my stretches. I do weight training, and I do my aerobic. I've right here in my apartment here. I'm fortunate to have a rather large apartment here in New York, and one of my rooms I converted into a little gym. I've got a stationary bike in there, and I got a SolarFlex weights, and I have room to lie down and do my stretches. I watch what I eat. I get enough sleep, and I find that when I go out, I don't have any problems, and so everybody has all these strict regimens that they do, in the weeks prior to going out. I'm not saying don't do it, you should certainly do it, but my formula, my advice is just stay fit. If you can get fit, especially when you come back from a trip, you're usually really fit, just stay that way. Do what you have to do consistently, but just keep at it. And right now I'm 76. Before this pandemic, I was about to leave. I was going to walk across the Atlas Mountains, the high Atlas Mountains in Morocco for 3 weeks. And of course that'll have to wait till next year. But, I say that to say, even like an old dirt kicker like me, kicking old dirt, if you stay in shape, you can do this forever.
Oh, that's fantastic. There's a question here. Did you ever experience racism while on the treks during the times where times in areas where other people were around? And so I know that's part of the dialogue we're hearing a lot with people of color in the outdoors. Did you ever experience those things, and what did you do to not become discouraged?
Well, I must say that, by the way you asked me that question, you're assuming that something's happened. But I have to admit that in all the years I've been out there, I've never had a negative problem with anybody. Now, it's fair to say that most of the places I go, I don't see anybody or see very few people. And the few people that I see are, outdoors people. I mean, they get it. There's enough room for everybody. And so I've never had any problem anywhere. I've been to 32 national parks. The other side, the flip side of that is I know that it happens to people. It hasn't happened to me, but I know that it can happen. As a matter of fact, I know that it's a big issue now with more and more people of color going out into the national parks and public lands, and more people getting involved in hiking and camping and skiing and what have you. Unfortunate incidents happen. And, people need to be careful, I guess, when they go out there. But, it's something that we have to deal with. It's part of a much larger picture that we're going through now with Black Lives Matter. The bottom line is nature belongs to everybody, and nature doesn't discriminate. And therefore, everybody has a right to be there. And I still believe that although these things happen and that it's unfortunate when they do, I believe that most of the people who go out into the backcountry are good people, and people who just want to share the experience and get the benefits that they can get from being out there. I'm a member of the Explorers Club, and I'm also the chair of the diversity and inclusion committee that they have there. And so I'm familiar with issues not only within the club, but because I'm a marketing consultant and my practice deals with cultural differences. So I'm really aware of what can happen and what does happen, but I still believe it's a safe place to go, and that everybody should just get out there.
That's great. there's a few questions here about how did you, through the years, fit these kind of trips into your life, your work-life balance, maybe personal responsibilities, planning. How did you make room, you know, in your schedule financially to make room for some of these great adventures?
Well, the short answer is I have a job. But in 1975, after 9 years of working in corporate management positions in marketing, I left to start my own business. It's a marketing research and consulting business, JRH, my initials, JRH Marketing Services. Started in 1975. It is now the oldest African-American owned research and consulting firm in the United States. And because I was the founder and president, I could leave. You know, a lot of people start their own business and they don't do anything for the first 20 years because they're afraid if they go on vacation that that something will happen with the business and maybe they should just stick around and work. I've seen it happen so many times. I wasn't like that. I felt that if I was going to be in business, that the business was going to have to support my lifestyle and that I wasn't going to be a slave to that business. I was also lucky in that I had a brother, a younger brother, who, when I started work, was just finishing school. He just graduated from Harvard, and he came in with me as a partner. And so every year when I wanted to go out on a trip, I was so fortunate because I could go and I could stay as long as I wanted. I never had to worry about my business. I knew that he would take care of it. The employees that I had would be doing their job. And I'm talking about going out for weeks at a time where I could not call in. I couldn't find out what was happening. I never had to worry about it. It was never a problem. I'm still in business now, although I'm semi-retired right now. But I was extremely, extremely fortunate that I was able to make a good living and take the time to live my dream, you know, and to go out there and live my life the way I wanted to live it. And I'm still grateful for that. I'm still working too.
There's a great picture in the book of you as a Boy Scout, and I was curious about who, it's a really, really great photo. Who pushed you or who introduced you to the Boy Scouts, and how did that become introduced into your life?
Well, the stock answer to that is read the book. But I can tell you, because the full story is in the book, the only reason I got into the Boy Scouts was because my parents didn't want me here in the city during the summer. You know, this was back in the 50s and early 60s. There were gang wars, turf battles. You know, I grew up in the projects, and my parents felt that in order for me not to get caught up in crime and what have you, that the safest thing for me to do in the summer was for them to sign me up in the Boy Scouts and send me away to summer camp in the Catskill Mountains. And let me tell you, I went kicking and screaming. I didn't want to go. You know, all the guys that I grew up with in the city, you know, they would see me in my Boy Scout uniform and they were like, ah, you know, and I really hated it. But when I got to 10 Mile River and started to learn how to make a fire in the pouring rain and how to read a map and follow animal tracks and which foods were edible and things like that, it changed my life. You know, even though I knew I couldn't use those skills back in the city, the confidence that it gave me that I could live in a totally different environment and still do it comfortably and enjoy being out there. What an awakening that was, you know. But if it wasn't for my parents saying, look, you're going, I wouldn't be here talking to you today.
I think we have time for one more question. What is one of the most memorable wildlife experiences you have had?
Whoa, one of many. Let's see. You know, I remember being up in Alaska. I've done a number of trips in Alaska, and everybody's always, you know, worried about grizzly bears. And I spent in my lifetime well over a year in grizzly country, unarmed and alone, and never had a problem with bears. But I know they're out there. And so I remember once I was up in Alaska, and late in the afternoon, it started to snow. And a little while later, I decided to make a camp. And I made my camp. I went to sleep. Next morning, I woke up and I unzipped my tent flap and looked outside, and right around the perimeter of my tent were these huge grizzly tracks. And I have a photo of it somewhere of my size 12 boot easily fitting inside the rear foot of this grizzly. This bear came during the night. I could see the tracks coming down the river where he came down, walked around my tent. He was easily 2 feet or 1.5 feet away from me. I didn't even know. And if it hadn't snowed, I never would have known he was there, because all I saw was footprints. So what it proved to me is that grizzlies don't really, are not really out to predate or track down and kill and eat humans, because he easily could have had me. Now, again, being experienced, I had no food in my tent. I had nothing that this bear would want. And I know he got a good sniff because he walked completely around it and walked away. So my, this wildlife encounter was an encounter that I wasn't even aware of, but I was within 1.5 feet of a grizzly bear. Who knows how long it took for him to walk around and how long he stayed around.
Wow. Well, JR, I wanted to say thank you on behalf of Suet Park. And I know Joey's we've been super excited to hear your presentation, and thank you. We have a lot of gratitude for you being here.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I thank you and all the people who were listening to my talk. Thanks a lot for the opportunity, and have a safe trip. Keep on trucking and get outdoors as much as you can.
Well, thank you everyone for joining Suet Park Live. Tonight's presentation again can be watched. It'll be posted on the Rewind page. And also, finally, we hope to see everyone back here in 2 weeks as we explore Seattle's urban carnivores and Woodlawn Park Zoo and Seattle University. So again, thank you very much, and everyone have a good night.
All right, good night.
JR, thanks for staying up late with us. I know it's about time to call it a day.
Hey, no problem. This is New York, buddy. I'm good.
All right. It's time to go out and get dinner, right?
Yeah, now I go out and, go in the kitchen and make something to eat here now.
There you go. Well, thank